When I was a small child, my family and I lived in the southern Balkavid plains, in the small farming town of Maison. Maison was a trading and agricultural center at the crossroads of two major routes through that country, and every fall we would see traders come in to celebrate the harvest. It was a delightful time, and a scary one for a child. I remember that there were celebrations of the coming renewal through the cold of winter, but also the fear of the death that came with the fall. There was one memory in particular that stuck with me from those times, from the harvest festival that marked the point when the trees began to lose their leaves and the shadow of cold and death crept over the land. It was a time when farmers would come in with great dishes of food, and also traders and merchants with their own unique wares. There was one in particular I enjoyed, a dwarf who came in year after year. He was a sculptor of wax, and he could sculpt anything, I believed as a child. He would sculpt models for your home. He would make candles, but I believe what held me captive most as a young one were the wax statuettes that he would make. He could make them very small, about an inch high, or if you paid a handsome sum of coin, he would make them of realistic size, so much so that they could look real from a distance. They would be flawless, with either messy hair or straightened hair, immaculate suits or peasant garb, but what I remember most about them was their eyes. That's how you could tell the difference, that they weren't real when you looked at them, their features caught in a rictus of sculpted emotion. The eyes, though, they were blank and empty. There was nothing in them. They just stared out at you. And I remember being terrified of them, even as the wax sculpture drew me in. For many years, that memory stuck with me, until eventually it fled from my memory as I grew older, and the harvest festival became routine. But, like all memories such as those, it clung on, like a bad dream, just waiting to resurface. Many years later, when I became an adult, I worked as a cobbler. It was a trade sorely needed in Maison. Our shoes were constantly in need of repair or replacement in those hardy times. I had stayed in Maison with my family when I heard word from a passing merchant of a town to the north, in that inland sea I'd heard so much about but never quite gone to see. A place called Shaumeny, in need of cobbler, an isolated community. I trusted my craft, and so, believing in my good fortune, I set out north to settle in that abode. The travel took several weeks, and in those autumnal months, the way was slow at first. I had to take care. These were times when bandits would prowl the high roads, looking for those unfortunate enough to be in their path, or too hasty to find shelter, keep an eye out for their surroundings. But it was after several days of travel upon the roads, and a trip on a ferry across a grey, unbroken sea, that I came upon the craggy, rock-filled isle that housed Shaumeny. It was a small fishing community, I believe. It dealt mainly in capturing food and other necessities from the sea and selling them to those merchants that would pass by, disreputable folks who would charge much for their services and pay less than although they deserved. But the community seemed well knit, though distrustful of me when I arrived. They looked at me like an outsider, one who brought ill will. I was not a trader who would pass on soon, but one who came with luggage and baggage. I remember when I first saw them, their sullen faces looking at me, how their eyes looked. Empty eyes, that, though their expressions wore an appearance of distrust, the eyes themselves were empty and grey. I shook it off. I was tired from my journeys, but that memory from long ago when I was a child stuck with me still. I remember trudging through the dirt-strewn roads. They were not paved with cobble or asphalt. This was not that kind of place. It was out of the way, and I found the hovel where I would stay. It had been abandoned for some time, and I knew I would have to put much work into repairing it. Still, it offered shelter for the night, and it was there that I slept and waited. Those next few weeks were a strange one in this town. I was alone in repairing that hut. No one would offer their aid, though as I would go through the town to get the things I desired, I would feel their gazes upon me. It was a strange town. Few people ever came. I saw, oddly, that there were no children, no elderly in this place. I dismissed it, foolishly. I assumed that this was partially the reason why I had drawn such odd stares. This was a community in decay, and under the arrival of a newcomer in a place where no families that had children and there were no elderly must be naturally upsetting to the normal state of affairs. But still, I can't forget that every time I would travel through those streets, there would always be a procession of townsfolk, those not out on the seas fishing, I presume, bearing a coffin, large and nailed shut, of driftwood, being paraded through the streets. There was no cemetery in Shaumeny, so I know not where they brought them. But every day there was a new coffin, a new procession, and a series of those blank eyes staring back at me. I had been in Shaumeny for several weeks once the hut was completed. I had not met anyone, though I had spoken with some of the townsfolk at the local inn when I went there to sup. I had gotten some orders, and as I had finished several at once that evening, I decided that it was time to introduce myself to the townsfolk and demonstrate my craft at the same time. I had told my customers that they could come in to pick up their orders, but I knew that at this late hour there was the evening service at the local shrine, and I decided that, going there with my services, I could meet the community and, hopefully, push away the distrust that they thrust upon me every single day. I bagged up my cobbled shoes, and I headed through the streets. The services there were strange. Everyone went to the shrine for a service. I assumed they were a religious town, praying for the harvest. I could not ignore, however, that the streets were quiet and empty. Only the wind whistling in from the sea let me know that I was still alive to see. Some doors were open, some crates left open from where sailors had been unpackaging them, but nary a soul, no person, nor rat, nor cat, nor anything else drudged their way through the streets but I. And I came to that shrine by the sea, sitting atop the highest point of land, very unnerved by my surroundings. The two wide wooden doors that marked the entrance to that building lay ajar, and as I approached, I could hear the sound of song through the cracks of that door. I peered in, and I saw them, the townsfolk. They were all standing, very still, looking ahead, row after row, pew after pew, at the altar. Their eyes gaze were blank, empty voids, but I could see no whites within them. The pupils were stretched out beyond, and I could see in that dark void there was something in that emptiness. An adoration, a happiness was there, an emotion I had not seen before in those eyes, and the expressions upon their face were not of distrust, but smiles of joy and comfort and community. And there, on the altar, preparing the ministrations of the god of that shrine, I could see the local priest, a Miss Sunam. I had seen her before, at the inn, at the local market, offering blessings to those who looked ill or worried. Rarely had I seen her gaze upon me. She was a guarded woman, I believed, perhaps scarred by some horrific accident. She had been cloaked in a large leather jacket, and bandages covered her face, leaving only a gap for the mouth to move and the eyes to peer out from within. But now I could see her standing there, the jacket cast aside, and I could see as the bandages unraveled and squirmed, as something beneath unroiled and writhed, appendages bound by strips of cloth, writhing to get free, as her eyes wide, full of love, she spoke in her mouth. Oh, it was a mouth beaked and full of not teeth but tongues that writhed just like the appendages, the arms that gripped her flesh under the bandages, and she spoke. My children, I love you. Our mother sends the bounty here. The winter comes, and our people are taken away to serve their purpose, but they are not forgotten here. You are family, we are family, and we are together, no matter what. She spoke with love, I heard, and I could feel it, like a hug, chilled around my body, even as my mind recoiled in aversion to what I was seeing. I left. I did not deliver my shoes. I could not step in. I could not fathom what I had seen, and only then, once I had returned to my hut, could I try to process what I had seen. I tried to forget it. It terrified me. I felt that I had seen something I should not have. Days passed, and my orders were picked up. I saw the townspeople, the same I had seen, wide-eyed, their eyes consumed by that black inkiness that had a motion of love deep within, again judging me, feeling a lack of trust in their gaze upon me. They would pick up their shoes and nothing more. This went on for several weeks, until there was a fire. Not at my place. They never came after my place. No matter how much they distrusted me, they never came after me. I think it was an accident, a fire at my neighbor's, but I could smell the acrid stench of smoke. I acted without thinking, and I fled out the door, next door. They were the one neighbor I had gotten to know, the oldest person on the island, an older woman, her hair bound back and gray, who had knitted me in a quilt when I had first arrived on the island. I burst in. The place was ablaze, and the heat scorched my flesh, and I saw her there, unable to seem to move, whisper under her breath, "It hurts, it hurts, it hurts." I grabbed her, tried to pull her away, and I was dragging her across the floor as she screamed and writhed, and just as I was thrusting her out the door, I could feel the building collapse upon me. splintered ashen wood piercing my flesh, and my mind slipped in darkness. I do not remember opening my eyes. I just remember the pain, the scorch marks upon my flesh, the burns that dug down deep into my bones. And I remember hearing the voice of the pastor who spoke to me as I lay there, caught between a world of pain and reality. You saved her, child. You saved her, even though you are not one of us. I thank you. We thank you. You are a dutiful child to us. I do not know what she meant. I couldn't fathom. The pain was too great. But I remember the cold as many hands shook me. I felt the splashes. Something enveloped my body, a coldness, a chill of wet, slimy feeling sliding over my body into my mouth. And I remember the air leaving my body, the coldness soothing my pain, even as my lungs protested. And I remember the darkness getting more and more profound. I remember my thoughts proceeding far from myself. And I remember hearing the cries of joy of children echoing as though through a murky black. I remember feeling the chill in my body. I remember feeling the fish gnaw at my flesh. I remember feeling the withered hands of elderly people guiding me down to a sandy bed. My eyes never opened. I had not opened them. The fire had scalded them, I believe. But I remember being there, being welcomed, even as the chill entered my body. I tell you this now, back in Maison, as I have come, an outsider, to bid a farewell to those of you who I loved. I have found my true family now, and now I can feel the air upon my skin, drying me out, mummifying me, creeping into my lungs, and turning my flesh to dust. You all don't feel it, for it's all you've ever known. But how can you, until you've been surrounded by a place that is living, by a watery place that provides your needs and surrounds you in a never-ending hug? How can you not understand your pain, the air that mummifies you and draws out your life, and when you pass, takes you to the dirt until you are nothing but dry ash, food for the worms? Even now my skin tightens, wanting to be shed, until I return to my family who loves me in the deep. You can come, and you will be loved, and you will not be forgotten.